Valdez, and thank you for being here tonight. As my colleague Senator Frockt and Rep. Pollet discussed, we will certainly do our best to get to all of your questions here tonight as best as we can. In terms of for me in our 2021 legislative session, this was actually my very first year as a committee chair. I was a brand new chair of our state government and tribal relations committee. So was able to help get some very important legislation passed in those committees, and we'll get to some of that here tonight. But really proud of the work that we did to ensure that once felons have served their time, they'll be able to have their voting rights restored immediately. We established a new state holiday, Juneteenth, and as Senator Frockt referred to, we definitely made some movement on police accountability, and a lot of good work. And myself, as a member of the Transportation Committee, we also were able to pass a very strong and robust budget, and we'll get to all of that tonight. So look forward to answering as many questions as we can tonight. Thank you.
Thank you so much for those opening remarks. We're going to go to our first question, which is from John. And John asks, a lot of amazing changes have been made in this legislative session. Can you give us an overview of the major accomplishments?
Well, gentlemen, am I starting with that? Is that right? Okay. Well, that's a huge question, John. I'm going to try to hit some of the key points. I want to start with where we began the session, which was in January. We were still in the midst of, and we still are today, although I think we're clearly in a better place. The vaccines were just getting rolled out around the country, and I think the pandemic and the pandemic recovery, as well as the upheaval with the claims of a fraudulent election, which I totally disagree with, were being presented to us. So it was a very tumultuous time. I can say that the legislature went, I think, first and foremost in trying to pass an early pandemic relief package, and it did a couple of key things. Number one, it changed and made sure that our small businesses were not going to be hit with a massive tax increase because of changes in their ratings for unemployment, for the unemployment system. So that was over $1 billion in small business tax relief. So you hear a lot about the capital gains tax from those who are not happy, but there are a lot of people who don't understand that we actually cut taxes both for small businesses and also for individuals, as Gerry mentioned, the working families tax credit. We also went to work on passing what I think was one of the key things that everyone realizes we have to do, which is what we call the Fair Start for Kids Act, which basically is a massive child care expansion. They're talking about this at the federal level, but here at the state level, we also accomplished that. And the main thing for all the stuff that was in the bill, and there was a lot of different programs and things, the main thing I want people to know is that what it means is that if you are lower to middle, low to low income, if you were in that range of working family, maybe two incomes, maybe one income, but you're not making that much money, but you certainly are not making more than would qualify you for Head Start, there's going to be more relief available to you for subsidizing your child care if we can find it. We also want to expand, and the bill aims to expand the number of child care providers. Very, very important bill, and it's going to be very important to see how that plays out over the year. I want to talk briefly about police accountability. There's so much to say. But going into the session, coming out of the upheaval from last summer, from the murder of George Floyd, and the many instances around the country, including here of cases like Manny Ellis, Charlene Lyles, the legislature went to work all throughout the interim in developing bills that over time, if you put them all together, what we're trying to do is change the policing culture in this state to ensure that communities have more confidence that they're going to be treated fairly, particularly brown and black communities and people who have felt for a long time that they have not gotten a fair shake and are not treated fairly, but also to make sure that there's more confidence and more transparency in the system. We do need police officers. We need good policing departments that have a culture of accountability a culture of transparency, and one that the communities can have confidence in themselves, those who are being policed. And that's what we aim to do. So there's more state oversight. There's significant expansion of independent investigations. We asked officers, we passed a bill that says if an officer sees another officer doing something wrong, then they have a duty, it's not subjective. They have a duty to actually intervene and ensure and stop what they see as a violation of policy or a violation of someone's civil rights. There's more data collection, so we know what can be happening. We also changed the law so that when there are bad officers who should not be on the force, that they can't just be passed from department to department, and that will change as well. These were very controversial, and I think unfortunately at times it devolved into who likes you're either pro-police or anti-police. But I think when people really look at the bills and the policies that we did, many of them over time are going to change the culture around community and enforcement in our state. And I think that was what we had to do coming out of what happened last summer. So that was a key part of our session. I'll let Gerry and Hav say a couple of words about some of the other big bills that we did.
Well, I know we're going to want to be talking about climate change, so I'll just hold off on that a little bit and say that we really put a tremendous push into access and assistance for students attending community and technical colleges, and increasing the diversity of our faculty at community and technical colleges. And this expands on the work that we've done. The three of us have helped lead over the last few years to ensure that every single person who wants to go to college in Washington will have an assurance that if you're below median income, we've got support for you to get into school. And now we've got to provide that support to get you through school, the advising, the guidance, the mental health, and other supports, and especially for those students who never had any other family member who's ever gone to college. We call them first-generation students. And they need special support, and we need to give it to them. And we've made a tremendous investment there this year. I'm also very proud to say that after 4 years of trying my legislation to finally ensure that we test every public school for lead in the school water so that our children aren't drinking water with levels of lead that we know reduce their IQ and cause behavioral health issues for the rest of their lives. And Governor Inslee signed that. Wow, that was a slip. Governor Inslee signed that last month, and it's going to make a big difference in public health. And we'll be talking about public health a lot as well, I'm sure, as we go through tonight. Representative Valdez?
Thank you, Gerry. So, in my opening comments, I talked about some of the work that we did in my very first year as the chair of the State Government and Tribal Relations Committee. And I think it was just a monumental and historic work that we're going to actually have an official state holiday in our state, Juneteenth, that we are finally going to, again, for felons who have served their time, no longer their voting rights will be restored, being tied to paying their legal financial obligations, that once you serve your time, you will have your voting rights restored. A small bill, which got some attention, I guess, from the insiders, was that we're now going to have in Washington, D.C. as one of our statues and statuary hall, the legendary Billy Frank, and being able to help pass those bills all through the state government committee, was really important work. I do want to highlight, though, some of the important work that we did as myself, as a member of our House Transportation Committee. And, we knew that going into this year, because of the impacts of COVID, we had serious revenue impacts. If it were not for the federal government assistance, we would have been in a lot worse shape. But we were able in this transportation budget to add more support for our culverts, more equity in our transportation projects, further investments in our multimodal, active transportation and transit for, et cetera, green transportation, and restoring critical funding for our Connecting Washington projects. So being able to be a part of that, again, in a year when in January, we really thought we were going to have to make some significant cuts in our transportation budget. We were able to, at least because of the help of the federal government, provide a budget that at least sustains things where they are.
Thank you so much for that. Our next question is from Samantha, who asked, remote testimony allowed so many more people to participate this legislative session. What do we need to do in order to keep this option moving forward?
Yeah, I'd be happy to take that question to Emily. I think it's fair to say we were all unsure in the legislature when the session started how this all remote session was going to work. I think we were, of course, hopeful and that it would work out really well. And considering we had not done something like this on a full platform, there had been some trial balloons. I know last year in the House where we took a few smaller committees took public testimony, during committees, but obviously we had a full Senate and a full House going to an all virtual session. We didn't know how it was going to work. I think reviews and op-eds have clearly shown that it worked really well considering our challenges having to be virtual. Sure, it would have been great if we had been there all in person, like we normally are, but obviously because of the pandemic, that just wasn't a thing that that we could have done here in 2021. But the numbers showed. I mean, I think there was an op-ed in the Seattle Times a couple weeks ago by the League of Women Voters, really wanting to ensure that we keep the at least having that engagement of virtual engagement where our residents and our citizens no longer have to go to Olympia and travel, whether you live in Ponderay County and have to travel, a few hundred miles to get to Olympia to testify. That's clearly what the public clearly wants us to ensure that we somehow can keep this option of being able to testify in a remote fashion. Obviously, we have not. I can't speak for the Senate, but in the House, we have not had, at least among our members with our leadership, those discussions on how that will continue. But I am pretty positive there will be some type of that activity being kept for 2022 and so forth, because clearly the public really embraced that. I can speak, to some of the bills that came in front of my committee. We had on one bill, I think 300 or 400 people sign up to testify. Obviously, we couldn't get to them, but absolutely amazing that you would not have been able to do this, I guess, in the way that it's always been done, which is having to come in person. So to answer that, again, to get back to the ultimate question, I would anticipate that you will continue to see some type of version of where the public can testify in a remote fashion. But of course, it's always good, like you are today, to remind us legislators that you liked it, and this is our priority, and we want to make sure that that we keep doing it.
Great. Thank you for these questions, folks. If you are tuning in now, this is a live virtual town hall with your 46th district legislators. And if there is something you'd like to ask them, make sure to leave a question in the comments, and a staff member will make sure to get your question to our lawmakers. We are moving on to another question. This one is from Jeff, and Jeff asked, what, if anything, are you doing to encourage people to get vaccinated?
I'll take that. Thank you very much for that question, Jeff. I hope that everyone who is watching and listening will, if you haven't already gotten vaccinated, you will do so. Our goal, I think that I'm speaking for the three of us and for our Democratic colleagues, was to, number one goal for this session, absolutely over anything else, was to ensure that science and public health would guide our state's policy in recovering from the pandemic. And as a faculty member at the UW School of Public Health, I am incredibly proud of how this state modeled for the rest of the nation many of the policies we needed to get through the pandemic. And we know that our policies saved tens of thousands of lives. I want you to think about that. We saved tens of thousands of lives in Washington and hundreds of thousands across the nation with the steps we took. And that includes working really hard to try to have vaccination available to people. In our first budget effort in the legislature to distribute federal funds, we distributed over $600 million to local governments and public health agencies for vaccination and contact tracing efforts. We can't forget, we still need contact tracing. It ain't over. We still need contact tracing. We need to know where we're having breakouts and to try to intervene, talk to people and say, you can protect yourself now and get vaccinated. Many of you are also aware that a couple months ago, I asked colleagues to join me in urging that Seattle Public Schools get off the dime and partner with the city of Seattle, which was willing to do it. Thank you, Mayor Durkin, willing to offer school-based vaccination sites along with the other mobile sites that the city of Seattle has so successfully done with federal and state funds, and the county and Dow Constantine has done. And they were willing to say, we're not even going to wait for the federal funds. And our job as legislators say, we've got your back. If you spend your local money, we will backfill you. And we've done a great job in Washington State, especially on the west side. And sadly, we have some counties that have really dismal rates. And we have a lot of educational work to do with those counties. And that was also seen in, instead of having science and public health guide the response, there were a couple of counties where local elected officials said, we're going to override or even throw out our professional MD public health officer because we don't want a science-based approach. And we have legislation that passed that said we're going to try to improve how we organize our public health agencies to ensure that science governs them. And we put in $150 million into local public health to keep going. So we had quite a response, and I'm very proud of what we've done. But we're not done yet. Everyone needs to get vaccinated unless they're immunocompromised or under 12 right now.
All right. Our next question is from Midge. Senator Frockt, thank you very much for your efforts to pass the Death with Dignity Amendment this year. Do you anticipate that the amendment to the Death with Dignity law will pass in the next session?
So the answer to the question is possibly. I think the reasons that the bill did not pass the Senate is there was not really a strong champion on the majority side for the bill, and honestly, many in the minority were against the bill. And I think it would have, by the time it came up, it would have, it was going to take hours and hours, maybe eight hours of floor time for us to debate that one bill. And given the many other things that we had to do that were I know this is important to many people, but given the urgency of so many other bills like that I mentioned, or things like police reform, economic recovery, healthcare, climate change, it just didn't make it. So I think what has to happen is that the advocates for that bill have to have a strategy of trying to get action to take place sooner. I also think, candidly, they need to do more explanation for members so they understand why some changes to the Death with Dignity law are probably warranted at this point. And I know that after really talking to people and going into it in some depth, because I had to vote on it in the healthcare committee, I felt better about the changes that were being proposed and why. And I think there will be other work that needs to be done. So that's my recommendation for those that are advocating for that bill.
Great, thank you very much. Our next question is from Chris, and Chris asks, armed far-right extremists are a major force in American society right now. What is the plan to defend our democracy against them?
Yeah, I'll be happy to take that question, Emily, and thank you to Chris for that question. First, let me say that in terms of those extremists who are armed, I think one of the major bills that we tackled and were passed is that we're finally going to secure our Capitol campus, no longer allow public carry of firearms onto our campus, where folks clearly are just there to intimidate and prevent things from our democracy from being a democracy and to intimidate. It also goes just beyond, I guess, those folks who are armed. There's also our voting rights. So we had actually, there was an article I read a few weeks ago about the number of bills or the number of state legislatures that were considering rolling back voters' voting rights or putting more roadblocks and more barriers to prevent people from exercising their right to vote. And one of those states that was not listed was actually the state of Washington. But I can assure you that there were plenty of bills that were introduced in our legislature this year that actually whose sole goal was to really prevent and to put up many roadblocks and barriers to prevent our residents and citizens from voting. I mean, there were bills, for example, that would limit the right to mail-in balloting. There was a bill that actually would have removed all of our drop boxes. There were bills. There was one bill, for example, that would have, when it came to the election of governor, would have created, I guess, a mini version of how we elect our president. But in this case, it would be by county, and then each county would then be up the votes, and each county would then elect who our governor was. So it would no longer be the popular vote in our state. So clearly, many bills introduced that would have harmed our public, would have harmed our institutions. Fortunately, none of those bills got through because those bills again were simply damage to our state and damage to our public. So I imagine we will still be seeing many of these come forward in 2022 and beyond. But I can assure you that and of course I know that Senator Frockt, Rep. Pollet agreed we will do everything in our ability to ensure that those laws again that are strictly there to prevent people from voting and harming our democracy will never get back our.
I'd like to just make a very brief comment on that as well. Everything Javier said is spot on. I hope that the people who are watching this, if you care about our democracy, you will remain vigilant about what is happening around the country. The light should be blinking red right now. I've been reading a lot this year about how countries fall from democratic systems into something else, either that is authoritarian or where people don't have confidence. And we are seeing a sustained, real-time effort to destroy the confidence that people have in democratic elections around the country. And we need to be vigilant. We need to speak up against it. We need to work with friends in other states against these measures, and we need to stand for the truth. Being in a democracy doesn't mean that your side always wins. It means that sometimes you lose and you go back to the drawing board and you figure out how to appeal the next time in the next election. And there are unfortunately people in this country who don't seem to think that's the right system, including the former president. This is wrong, and we should all be very, very concerned about it. And I think it's something really, really important, as important as almost anything else that's going on in the country right now. So I hope people will pay attention and pay attention closely.
Thank you, everyone, for these great questions. If you are just tuning in now, this is a live virtual town hall with your 46th district legislators. And if there is a question you'd like to ask them, make sure to put it in the comment section and a staff member will relay your question to our lawmakers. We are moving on to another question. This one is from Richard, and Richard asks, what did the legislature do about climate change this session? And are you in touch with climate scientists at the University of Washington?
Thank you. I'll take that question. I was expecting a number of questions to come up tonight about climate change, as you heard from my opening remarks. So thank you very much, Richard, for being the first to get one in. And as I said earlier, we had literally the most groundbreaking session, did far exceeding expectations on climate change. And Washington State is now the nation's leader in having legislation on the book with a very well worked out plan for how we continue to ratchet down guaranteed reductions in carbon emissions from major sources and put the revenues that we get from the Cap and Invest program into renewable energy, transit, and I think very importantly, into environmental justice investments, particularly in those communities that have had for decades the absolute worst air quality and the worst health effects and lowest life expectancies, and indeed such bad air quality that we know it actually reduces children's ability to learn and to succeed in life. And we put the dollars in there, 35% will go to supporting those communities to emerge from the obfuscation of the clouds of highway emissions and diesel emissions and stationary emissions and the other contaminants, lead, arsenic, that cause the high rates of asthma and other illness in those communities, especially including pulmonary illness. So very proud about that. And also we adopted the Clean Fuel Standard, which was a huge battle and a huge step forward joining California in saying transportation contributes 45% of our carbon emissions. We need to have a ratcheting down of the carbon emissions from our vehicles. It's the only way we succeed, and we did it this year, and we will be doing it. We even passed the goal of phasing out all sales of gas-powered vehicles in decades. So I would say that the one surprise note here is this. I worked very hard and closely with our Native American tribes and as sovereign government to ensure that they had a seat at the table, which is the only just and right thing to do. And the governor surprisingly vetoed that seat at the table. It's hard to understand why he did that. We worked very closely, and I think, well, I know I'll be introducing legislation to ensure that they have that seat at the table for local planning as chair of the local government committee. I've been working with them already, and we will do that. We will go ahead and make sure that they have a seat at the table, because as you've heard before, if you don't have a seat at the table, you're probably on the menu. So it's time to make sure that after 100 years of genocide, we have a seat at the table. And that's even more important this week when we've just heard about the uncovering of mass graves of Indigenous children at residential schools in Canada. But it's not like we didn't have residential schools here in the United States. We also have hundreds of missing Native Americans in Washington. Thank you.
All right. Our next question has been asked by many people, and this is, What are you doing about affordable housing, homelessness, and the related crime issues in neighborhoods and encampments here in the 46th district?
Well, thank you for the question. And I want to say, first of all, I know that this is on the minds of many people in our community. Clearly, the pandemic situation made things worse because it was not possible for people who might otherwise have been in congregate shelter to be in congregate shelter. And I think this also says, I think we also learned because of this, that where there is progress being made, it's when we can actually transition people from living unsheltered into a place with four walls and a door. If it's a hotel that a county or a municipality has bought or is renting, or some other way, the results seem much better. And so we need to do that. We need to get people in to that transition and through to permanent supportive housing. What I want people to understand is that the legislature is largely a funding source and also makes some policy changes to have a more regional approach. So, for example, Representative Pollet was very involved in a bill changing the rules so that other parts of, let's say, King County, other communities have to have a more equitable approach to where affordable housing might be located. You know, because we do have a situation where in the city of Seattle, because of services that are provided here, Mayor Durkin, I was with something with her just yesterday, and she pointed out that 60% of the people who are homeless, according to their data, are coming in from other parts of the county or even other parts of the state. And so this is a phenomenon that happens, and so we do need a regional approach. So there were some policy changes in that regard. But mainly, we did a number of things. Number one, we provided, almost $1 billion in eviction rental assistance that will largely from the federal government, but also from some other sources that we passed ourselves in House Bill 1277 that's going to really help, including vouchers for people who are currently living unsheltered, so we can get them hopefully into shelter. Number two, we provided a stable funding source for the permanent supportive housing funds that we need in that same bill through an expansion of our document recording fee. And on the capital side, which I was the chair of in the House, we have record investments in the Housing Trust Fund, as well as we did something somewhat different, is we created a new fund for rapid capital housing acquisition to assist local governments and communities and nonprofits in purchasing or acquiring or getting rental space to deal with people immediately who are unsheltered to the best that we can. You know, the Housing Trust Fund is really important, but it's the kind of thing where we make an investment and 3 or 4 years later, we have a wonderful new project that has 50 or 70 apartments or whatever it might be for low and moderate income people. But this other fund that we created, which I hope people will pay attention to and which we need to invest more in, is to do stuff immediately and rapidly to get people out of the encampments and into housing. But I have to say, the state government is not fully responsible for this. There are some things that we are absolutely have to do a better job of, namely better behavioral health systems, which we are also working on to transform. And that is certainly critical, and we need to do more there. But we need our city governments and our local governments to execute with the tools that we have given them. And we have given them many, whether it's funding sales tax revenues that they can bond off of, direct sales tax authority that they're utilizing here in Seattle, and then also these recent tools that we're working with them on. So the state needs to be a good partner with our local government and our nonprofits. We need to leverage the federal funds that we can get, but we need at the local level the city government here to execute on the policies, and they need to hear from you, the constituents, with what you see happening and needs to happen. And I think, you know, given the mayoral campaign season and the council campaign seasons, both for the King County Council and the City Council, those are things that people should be focused on. So I would say ask your local officials and the candidates, what do you plan to do with the money that's coming down from the federal government and the state government? And how can we transform our system quickly over time into a better situation? Finally, I just want to point out that, well, I'll let Javier and Gerry talk about maybe the situation in 125th very quickly. Gerry, Jav, one of you wanted to comment there?
Well,
yeah. Go ahead, Gerry.
You know, the three of us met with a large range of city officials about Lake City and homeless encampments. And, just from pure public health and humanitarian aspect, the day we met, there were over about 70 tents. That probably means 140, 150 people living homeless without proper shelters in that area. We simply asked for bathrooms and water, and the city put in one additional porta potty. Look, you've got to make a freaking priority for responding to humanitarian crises. It's just mind-boggling that the city council can't do something as simple as getting water stations out when we require water stations out for every 10 farm workers in fields. We can do it in city of Seattle. And it's just astonishing to me. And we need to look at it and say, we've got a public health crisis when we look at the conditions. And with work Senator Frockt has done, we've got, and frankly, Mayor Durkin's work on making sure that we have hotels open where people can go and get in to a building with 4 walls that are your own and your own bed, and social work and behavioral health supports. That's what we need to do, and we can do it. We know how to do this. It's a matter of willpower, folks.
If I too can add something, as Rep. Pollet and Senator Frockt alluded to, we, the 3 of us actually, met with the city. It was, I think, last November or last December, because we had received many emails and calls regarding, especially the encampment there on Lake City and 125th. And, it was very frustrating because the answer we got was, well, the city council defunded the navigation team. There's not much we could do. And I know, as Rep. Pollet then, just mentioned, we asked for one additional bathroom. And, but it was, again, very frustrating that at least in that meeting we had in November or December, that the lack of cooperation from the city on trying to help the residents of that encampment and help make it a little safer was just troubling. And I think as many as you know, there was recently a shooting there a few months ago, or a month or so ago. So we'll keep trying and doing our best to, when we hear from you, to let the city know that they have an obligation as well to do their part.
All right, thank you so much. We have a question from the live comment section. This question is from David, and David asked, how stable is transportation funding for new infrastructure or needed rebuilds?
Yeah, I'll be happy to answer that question, and thank you, David. So we got, and I'll just be blunt. We had some breaks come our way here in the 2021 session regarding our transportation funding. Late last year, we were in deep trouble. That our transportation budget was going to have to take deep cuts on many of the services and many of the things that we provide that our residents of our state expect. We were getting hurt by because of the pandemic. We knew that tolling revenue was down, revenue from our ferries was down, gas tax revenue down, and we were in trouble. But we had 2 things really bail us out here for 2021. One is we had Tim Hyman's initiative be ruled unconstitutional that he had on the ballot, which then freed up that revenue that had been the state was collecting but had not spent yet because we're awaiting the results of that lawsuit. But we also had a huge investment from our federal government to help all of our states to help again handle the impacts of the COVID pandemic, and our economies. Now, going forward for our next round of budgeting here for 2022, a lot of it is going to depend on how those revenues are looking here. I have not seen our latest numbers or forecast, but if we continue to see the numbers that we saw in 2021, or of course, unless we get another help from the federal government, we are going to have to make some again tough choices. And I mean, multimodal investments in our green transportation structure, just basic, our basic roads and maintenance, service on public transit. We made a huge investment in our Amtrak Cascades, and I know that we want to see continue to see that going forward. So it really depends. It really depends on how things continue here in 2022 and 2021 in our revenue, and let's cross fingers when our latest forecasts come in, that they show that we have rebounded and won't have to make those draconian cuts that we thought we were going to have to make earlier this year.
All right, we have another question in the comment section, and this one is from Heidi, who asked, getting the lead out of water in our schools is wonderful, but what's the plan for getting the lead out of paint in our buildings? Is this an issue?
Well, thank you, Heidi. And the youngest children, before they get to elementary and kindergarten, are most vulnerable. And indeed, we really need to look at exposure in the womb of fetuses, because that is a serious exposure route. And now I'm going into the medical exposures for lead, but we're exploring. I'm convening public health officials, public health experts from the UW, and epidemiologists, and educators, and looking at, do we now test for the water in child care centers, and how to intervene at thousands of child care centers to make sure that the water is safe. Or perhaps we put the money into having home visits for low-income residents and test their water and the lead in their paint, and intervene along with providing tests for whether or not they have dust levels that are likely to cause asthma in infants and children. And so that's something we're exploring right now, and love to have your input. Anyone who's on, we're designing this for next year's legislative session, so now it's time to have the conversation.
All right. Our next question is from Reba, and Reba asked, childcare job postings are hiring under $20 an hour. Professionals can't afford to live in the region at that rate. How can we get them a raise?
Well, I think we made a significant investment in childcare and early learning rates this year. And there are two aspects of what we have to do. One is we have to raise salaries, of course, and provide benefits. And we also have to increase the pipeline for training our early educators and child care facility educators. And we are working on both. And I think, if Senator Frockt wants to jump in, or Representative Valdez, but we really made a significant investment in expanding funding support for childcare and how we pay our childcare early learning providers. And removing some of the crazy obstacles. Our Working Connections childcare program, which probably is better than half or more of the states, said that you not only had to be in community college, but you had to be working full time and going to school to qualify. Well, if you want to get someone a new opportunity, just have them go to school full time and provide childcare. Don't say you also have to work full time. And we've rolled that back. That's a big step forward.
Yeah, I'll just say, I mean, obviously, it's a difficult question on how to get wages up in those environments. Many of them are private businesses, and I think the fact that the state is willing to come in and, as I said, provide more subsidy means that demand will be going up, and hopefully that'll cause these businesses to be more stable fiscally, and they'll have to and be in a position that they can raise wages for the people that they have to recruit to come in. So that's what I hope will happen. But I think with the additional public funding will stabilize some of these private businesses and allow them to expand and hopefully make their finances work better so they can increase wages. One other thing I also wanted to mention, there was a special part of a bill that we passed to expand in the individual insurance market, and we're really going to be emphasizing childcare workers as a cohort of people. There are thousands of them who don't have access to health care. So I think they'll be able to get, at the income levels that they have, much more subsidized health insurance on the individual market, and that too will make it a more attractive position, I hope.
Great, thank you. This next question is from John, who said, I have a 2016 Chevy Volt, and when I renew my license tabs, I have to pay an EV fee that is more than twice what I would pay in gas tax for a gas-powered vehicle. When will the Washington State Legislature repeal this unreasonable and anti-environmental tax on electric vehicles?
I'm happy to tackle that question, and that's not the first time this question has been asked, for sure. I mean, yes, that electric vehicle surcharge was added a year or so ago. I still recall this in the negotiations between the House and the Senate Transportation budget team, and it was a request from the Senate side, Senate Transportation, and which ended up being part of the overall transportation bill, a year or so ago. And I know that when that over the last couple of years, we have heard from a lot of folks in the district about that fee, having to pay the fee, and for the reasons why they feel they should not have to pay that. I'm sure. I mean, obviously, here in 2021, most of the debate or discussion on the transportation budget was just how do we just keep things going so we don't have to make, again, draconian cuts. And so I would imagine as part of next year's discussions, this will, I'm sure, will come up again. At the same time, there are some studies going on right now regarding road usage charge, for example, to come back to the state legislature on perhaps there could be how do we deal with the declining revenue of the gas tax, but how to ensure that all folks are paying for the roads that they use. So, yes, thank you for the question. I know that it's still on the minds of many of you. We haven't forgotten about it. And again, let's just cross fingers that in next year's budget cycle, our transportation revenue is a little bit more steadier, and then hopefully we can address it again.
All right, we are going to try and fit in a last question here. This one is from Donna, and Donna asked, would you consider sponsoring a bill to require a deposit for reusable bottles? That would be good for the environment and for climate change.
Well, let me just say, Donna, thank you. I'm laughing because when I was in college, which a while back now, I campaigned for bottle bill, deposit bill, and then law school here, I again fought for one. And I think, we do a fair job recycling, but we see the recycling market with big up and downs and questions. And we've moved forward with saying we've got to have phase out of one-time use plastics. So I'm all in favor of a bottle bill. I think they work, and they work well. And it is one heck of a big fight against the soft drink and other manufacturers in our state and across the nation. But it's worth it because we've got to move away from one-time use and hoping that people do the right thing individually to recycle, especially when the recycling markets collapse and we don't have requirements that are stiff enough for reused content.
All right, we are actually going to try and fit one more question in here. This one is from Tamara, and Tamara asked, with so many other states restricting reproductive rights, what are you doing to ensure reproductive rights are protected?
Well, thank you, Tamara, for that question. I think that this is a very important issue. We see what's happening. I think the U.S. Supreme Court is going to be taking up a case, and it's hard to say exactly what's going to happen. I think with the majority now on the court that Trump put in, I think there's a real question as to what kinds of restrictions are going to be allowed. What I would say to you is that we have state constitutional protections in Washington that were passed by the voters 30 years ago to protect reproductive rights. And so I feel very good about that. We've also passed the Reproductive Parity Act in recent years to ensure that there's equity for those in the health insurance market to make sure that they have an option to have plans with the full range of reproductive coverage, including abortion coverage. And then this last year, we passed a bill that I think is very important that makes it unlawful for employers in healthcare settings to penalize providers, doctors, for giving advice on, let's say, an ectopic pregnancy and what might need to happen in that situation. And even if their policy itself will not allow for that procedure to take place in their hospital, let's say, they cannot go after the physician for giving medically appropriate advice given that situation. That was a very important protection that was put in place and was a key priority of the reproductive health community this year. And I was a co-sponsor of that bill, and we did pass it.
All right, folks, that was our last question of the evening. Thank you so much to everyone who submitted questions for our lawmakers, either in the survey or in the comments. I am now going to turn it back over to them for some closing remarks. Senator Frockt, can you please start us off with those?
Well, I'll try to go very fast because I know we are cut off right at 7. First of all, I know some people in the chat did not get their questions answered. I'm sorry that happened. Send us a note. We each have emails, and we'll try to get back to you on specific questions you may have. But just know we look at all of them. I just want to thank people. This will not be our last community meeting like this or community session like this of the year. I suspect we'll have another one maybe in the fall or the late summer or early fall. And then we also do a town hall meeting before the next session for sure in December or even sometimes in early January. And I expect and hope that with vaccinations that we will be in a situation that everyone can get together in person and we can actually talk and have a good discussion about all of these things. So we'll just keep working on that. But mainly, I just want to say thank you again for your input and your interest. And please, I want you to know how much I appreciate hearing from all of you during the session. It informs what we do. We have small staffs. We are not able to respond to every single email, but I don't want people to think that we don't see them and hear them and read them, because we do. Thanks.
I'm happy to go next. Okay, yeah. Thank you all for the opportunity to talk to you tonight and answer your questions. I know it's a very nice, great day, great evening out there. So I want to make sure you have time to go outside and enjoy tonight. But as Senator Frockt alluded to, if we didn't get to your question, please, send us an email. We do our best to read them all, and our staff does, really does. We only have one staff apiece, but then they work pretty hard to ensure that we see everything that we need to see as well. And I look forward to our next town hall, and hopefully that can be in person. If not, I'm sure the ones that we'll have in late December, early January, before the 2022 session, it'll be great to see all of you again once more face to face. So thank you for the opportunity to be in here, and it is an honor to represent all of you in Olympia.
Thank you to both Senator Frockt and Representative Valdez. It's a joy and an honor to share this responsibility and honor of representing you all. And we do, as someone noted, we really collaborate and work hard together to make sure that we give the 46th District the best possible representation and put aside when we have an individual difference. And you can see that we really try to be a team together for you. And I will be resuming in person my traveling town halls once a month on Saturday mornings. So you can email me for when they are. After you're confident that we can go back out in public and have coffee with them. So for that, meantime, email all of us together at firstname.lastname@leg.gov. We'll try to respond to all the questions.
And that is our evening tonight. Again, thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. Like our lawmakers here said, if we did not get to your question, you can directly reach out to your offices, and we're going to have a screen right after this with all of their contact information. So again, thank you so much for joining, and have a great evening.